Thursday evening, and the showers in the north tend to fade away, and overnight we'll see clear spells. Not for everyone. There will still be some areas of cloud, particularly for Wales, for western parts of England, as well as for the northwest of Scotland. But where we do see clear skies, temperatures will fall into the low single figures, and again there'll be a touch of frost around first thing Friday. But plenty of sunshine despite the early chill in the air. Some remnants of Wednesday's wet weather and weather fronts still around, and so some cloud there across central parts as well as the far northwest. But otherwise, Friday's looking like a fine day, plenty of sunshine, even more sunshine to come on Saturday and Sunday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. And guess what? I'm going to start the show with some good news. How rare is that? British Iranians Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Assouri have finally been released from Iran and are on their way home. The former head of the British Army as well today has called for the UK to spend more on defence. This, of course, comes against the backdrop of a shrinking armed forces. So what do you reckon? Should we be spending more on keeping ourselves safe? And speaking of keeping ourselves safe these days, it's often from words. We apparently need to shield ourselves. The revised online safety bill gets published tomorrow, giving social media platforms responsibility for policing content. Many are saying it's an assault on free press. And anyway, should an algorithm really be deciding what we can and cannot see? And massive topic change, but I wonder, should it ever be illegal for a woman to have an abortion? Why am I asking this? Well, of course, because of some of the goings-on in America. I'll have that story and more coming up, but first, let's have a look at the latest news headlines.
It's 6:01. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. British Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has landed in Oman after leaving Iran. According to her husband, the first thing that she's asked for is for him to make her a cup of tea when she arrives in Britain later on tonight. The British Iranian aid worker was held for 6 years. Fellow British Iranian Anousheh Assouri was also released. Nazanin's husband and daughter say they're delighted.
Huge relief. Huge relief that she's on a plane, that she's coming home, that she's free. And thank you to everyone who's been helping along the way. It's been a long journey that people have been keeping us, following it on the news, on petitions with the government. I've said some rough things over the years, but in the end, she's coming home.
Nazanin's husband, Richard. Well, speaking in the Commons, Nazanin's local MP, Dewbs praised the whole family for their efforts during the ordeal.
But most importantly, I want to pay tribute to my constituent, Richard Ratcliffe, for his relentless campaigning, but I also think he's really set the bar high for all husbands across the world. Can I say to Nazanin, welcome home after 6 long years. And can I say to Gabriella, this time, Mummy really is coming home.
Dewbs. Well, speaking during a visit to Saudi Arabia, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says Nazanin's freedom was long overdue.
It's fantastic news that Nazanin is out at last, and I'm thrilled for her. I'm thrilled also for Anousheh Ashouri and Taba Morad, who are also out. It's been a lot of work by a lot of people. I want to pay particular tribute in the case of Nazanin to her husband Richard, and it's fantastic that she'll be now able to come back and see her family, see her daughter Gabriella.
Well, earlier this afternoon, during Prime Minister's questions, Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner urged the Deputy Prime Minister to make sure this situation is never repeated.
So will the Minister commit to a review of these cases to understand what more could have been done by the British Government to secure releases, and whether the lazy comments of the Prime Minister worsened the situation?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I can tell the Honourable Lady, having worked for 2 years with the concerted diplomatic effort led by the Prime Minister, that we have done absolutely everything that we can. She shouldn't give succour to the despotic regime that detained our nationals in Iran or around the world by suggesting it's anyone else's responsibility other than theirs.
Dominic Raab there, responding to Angela Rayner. President Biden says the US is committing $1 billion in security assistance for Ukraine, including drones and anti-aircraft systems. It's after Ukraine's president delivered a historic address to the US Congress. Speaking via a video link, Volodymyr Zelensky called for further military support and assistance following Russia's invasion. He also urged the United States to impose further sanctions against Russia.
Russia has turned the Ukrainian sky into a source of death, and it would be fair if it ended in a day, in 24 hours. That evil would be punished immediately.
And the RSPCA has issued a statement saying it has started the process of bringing a prosecution against West Ham defender Kurt Zouma and his brother Johan. They're being investigated over an alleged violation of the Animal Welfare Act. It's after footage emerged of the footballer slapping and kicking his pet cat. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that. Well, of course, you know by now, of course, you're watching us on your TV, on YouTube and digital radio, wherever you are. Good evening to you. Keeping me company tonight, my panel, Nick Bushvine, former diplomat and Sevenoaks Town Councillor, Piers Benn, a philosopher, and political consultant, Emma Burnell. Good evening. 2 new faces on the panel tonight. Welcome to both of you.
Good evening.
And you know the drill by now as well, you at home. It's not just about us here and our thoughts, absolutely, as well about yours. What's on your mind tonight, and what do you think about the stories that we're going to be getting into? You can reach me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Don't forget, of course, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can watch us live or catch up on all the best bits, which, of course, is Dewbs & Co. We are there. Get on it if you haven't already. Good evening to you if you're watching me there already. Now, let's start today, shall we? On a positive note, you'll always hear me whinging on this programme that the news always seems to be so doom and gloom. So tonight, very pleased to be able to share with you some really, really good news. Many of us will be familiar with these stories, but two detained British Iranians, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Asari, have been released from Iran. A Freeview national, Morad Tabaz, has also been released from prison. Zaghari-Ratcliffe departed Iran earlier this afternoon and arrived in Oman a couple of hours ago. She is due to arrive in the UK later tonight, although I've heard a bit of a rumour that her flight is delayed. Typical. Nothing ever runs on time, does it? Especially when you want it to. Nazanin was arrested, you may recall, in 2016 and accused of plotting to overthrow the Iranian government, which she denied. Nazanin's husband, Richard Ratcliffe, who lives with their daughter, Gabrielle, in London, has campaigned for her release, including going on hunger strike in October last year. And Foreign Secretary Liz Truss confirmed the government has settled a debt of almost £400 million, which was owed to Iran for some tanks, basically, from the 70s. Now, what...
Agonies endured by Nazanin, Anousheh, Morad and their families must never happen again. Our efforts to settle the IMF debt have also reached their conclusion. After highly complex and exhaustive negotiations, the more than 40-year-old debt between the International Military Services and the Ministry of Defence of Iran has now been settled.
Well, great news. I mean, can you imagine? Piers, I think I'll start with you. This has been a long time coming. Lots of us have followed some of these cases really intensely, and the family getting reunited, it is just great news, isn't it?
Obviously it is. I'm delighted that she's been released, and it's been 6 years of horror. She was arrested on some obviously trumped up and absurd charge of trying to overthrow the regime. There was then a threat of new charges being placed against her if the Iranian government didn't get what they want. And it looked as though she'd been released because of some deal. Now, the ethical question that people are going to be thinking about is whether the British government should have paid the money, which they're alleged to have done. It seems to me, quite apart from the obvious fact that this is blackmail and that she should never have been arrested in this way, and the regime has shown itself to be cruel and callous and unjust, but it seems to me that, from what I've read, this money was indeed owed. And if you owe money, the fact you don't like the creditor is usually not a reason for not paying the money. I mean, it can be a reason in extreme cases, but I think in this case, it looks as though the money was owed. Probably, I mean, nobody quite knows what's happened, but probably the money was paid, and the Iranians have kept their side of the bargain and have released her rather than invent new charges. So it's a sordid and horrible story, but one that thankfully today has had a happy outcome.
Yeah, so this money that we're referring to, by the way, this was about, I think it was 1,750 tanks that were due to be supplied to us. We actually cancelled that order after I think we'd received less than 200 of them. So this has all kind of rumbled on, and there's been a lot of dispute around the interest rate on this debt as well. Nick, interested in your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, obviously on a human level, this is fantastic news, and it's a great piece of work by the government, finally, to secure an outcome. But I think people will be, and I completely agree with what was said just now, but I mean, people will be concerned because the British government has had a policy for many years of not paying ransoms for hostages. Now, clearly, you can distinguish this because we had a pre-existing debt, which HMG acknowledged. You know, maybe one can distinguish it there. But nevertheless, you know, there is a slight worry that we're encouraging other people to take hostages and hold the government to ransom and hold those people to ransom. So it's a difficult one.
But do you, Emma, I mean, we live in very strange times at the moment, to put it mildly, where we're having to kind of get into bed with, do deals with all sorts of kind of regimes and countries that we may perhaps not want to. So, you know, for you, is this as simple as this amount of money was paid and it was akin to essentially a hostage money, or do you think it's perhaps more complicated than that?
I think the fact that we have owed this money for most of my lifetime does give you quite a strong mitigating factor for the argument that we're not just setting up a precedent for paying hostages. I think that we are paying back this debt at the same time that our Prime Minister is in Saudi Arabia desperately trying to shovel money towards a despotic regime in order to make sure that we can continue buying oil from one despot or another. We've just transferred which despot we want to do it from at the moment, gives us no real right to kind of go, oh, well, you know, we've got this total moral commitment to not giving money to despotic regimes, so we can't get our citizen whose life has been torture for 6 years and whose family have been in the most desperate need to get her home for 6 years, back at what turns out to be absolutely zero cost to us, really, because all we've done is paid a debt.
Can I also chip in and just say that, I mean, it's interesting timing because other stuff is happening in the Gulf, which is an incredibly complex environment. I think the long-standing talks about the revival of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, is reaching a critical stage, we're told. And what we don't know, for example, is to what extent some of those issues are at work behind the scenes. And it'll be interesting to know what Boris Johnson does discuss with Mohammed bin Salman when he's in Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis and the UAE will be looking on with great concern at just how much of a deal the West is willing to do with their number one enemy, who are the Iranians.
Could I just say, though, that I think what's happened with the Iranian regime is a kind of mutually face-saving solution. And I think that generally, in these horrible times, we should look for face-saving solutions if we can. The British government can say, well, we don't like the Iranians, we're not caving in to hostage takers, we're paying this because it's owed. And that's actually true, even though, in another sense, it is being paid because of the hostage situation, which is thoroughly horrible. But we can say that, and that would be true, but not the whole truth. The Iranians can then say that they were able to, that by charging her with these things that they will say she did, they managed to wake the British government up to what it owed, or whatever the official story is. There'll be some sort of face-saving solution. It's a horrible business, and it obviously is a hostage situation, but it looks as though the money was owed, and I think should have been paid.
Yeah, and let's not forget as well, I think Boris Johnson, he muddied the waters a little bit, didn't he, at some point in this whole process as well, where he made suggestions of, you know, some of the activities that was being undertaken. So I think it'll be quite interesting. I think, obviously, first things first, let's get these people back safe and well, breathe a big sigh of relief, and then I think there's going to be quite a few questions that she'll want answering. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, let's talk about free press, shall we? Do you think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been shining a light on free press? What does that mean? Who should be able to have a view? What views should we be able to be exposed to? And I don't say that lightly, you know, because you might be quite familiar with some different outlets, so Russia Today, for example, being one, that's basically been removed from our sites. Yes, of course, you can still access its content, but not very easily. The reason that I bring this up is the revised online safety bill is due to be published tomorrow, and there's some fears that within this, basically, algorithms will be used by tech companies, social media companies, to remove harmful material, and in doing so, could basically roll out to block genuine news organisations and what people are calling legitimate news stories. See, what do we think to this? Personally, if I had my own way, anyone would be able to say anything. I'd be able to choose exactly what I want to see and not see, and be able to process and apply critical thinking to making my own decisions. But is it really that simple, Nick?
Well, actually, I think fundamentally you're absolutely right. I mean, having served in various difficult places around the world, it just reminds you about how precious democracy, accountability, and freedom are, because frankly, they're not in ready supply in large chunks of the world. And I think it's absolutely right to be very cautious indeed about the road to hell is paved with good intentions, isn't it? And this is clearly a well-intentioned piece of legislation. We'll have to see the details when the bill's actually published. But it's so easy to chip away at our freedoms and our freedom of speech. And it's not just this, it's cancel culture, it's a whole range of things that are going on. It's very rich people being able to use expensive lawyers to shut people down and stop them publishing articles that they might consider unfortunate. And, you know, we really have to fight, I think, and question every attempt to curtail our precious freedoms. Otherwise, they'll disappear.
Yeah, I completely agree, Piers.
Yes, I fundamentally agree with that. Free speech is obviously very important for all the reasons given by the classical writers like John Stuart Mill. But I think more needs to be said because if you take the argument that's often used against various speakers, for example, on campus disputes, but elsewhere too, the argument is, well, yes, we should believe in a presumption of free speech, but not when a certain harm threshold is reached. And then the debate's about what that harm threshold actually is, whether it's hurt feelings or whether it's incitement to violence or discrimination or something like that. And it does get quite difficult. I think with the Russia Today business, I mean, I am rather surprised that there's been this move to try to censor Russia Today. It seemed to me quite wrong. In fact, I was told, though I wasn't around at the time, that during World War II, the British government did not censor the Nazi press. You were actually allowed to read what the Nazis were saying, which might sound astonishing, because there was a sort of old-fashioned, classical, liberal tradition alive then. I do think with the online harms bill, though, there's a complication, because it's one thing to say that social media platforms should be stopped from hosting content, and I agree on the whole they shouldn't be stopped unless they are inciting violence or some kind of harm of that kind. But it is another thing to try to compel people or those platforms to host certain content. See, that looks like compelled speech, or at least compelled hosting, and that actually is the flip side of the coin with free speech. And I'd leave these platforms to decide for themselves what to host or not to host. I don't like coercive measures which operate apparently in the name of free speech, much as I am very enthusiastic about free speech.
Emma? I think the thing that we need to consider is free speech isn't actually absolutist. We always put some limits on it. And those limits should be minimal. They should be absolutely minimal. But there are really, really important distinctions that we have to be able to say now that everybody is able to have a voice. How do you judge facts? How do we do that properly? And how do we make sure that those with malign intentions who are lying to us are not able to be stood alongside those who are trying to tell the truth and seen in equal measure? And I don't think that's necessarily done through very broad-based legislation, but I do think that these questions should be grappled with far more than they are, rather than simply saying, you can't say that, or you can say anything you want to. I think free speech isn't necessarily free. I think the more money you have, the more speech you quite often get, and that's a big problem. So where do we make sure that minority voices, the voices of those who are least heard, are equally amplified? And I think that's a very important thing to consider too. And some ways, social media has given many people a voice that they didn't have before. It's still in its infancy. How do we use that? How do we help that voice to grow up? That's the question we should be asking ourselves far more.
But I do think, Nick, I think that these social media platforms, I'm about to say a sentence and I can hear my head saying, no, I want to say, I think they're overstepping their mark a little bit. The part of my brain then kicks in and says, well, hang on a second, because they're private businesses. They can do whatever they want, actually. It's their platform. They can do and say what they want. But I do think that they're overstepping their mark a little bit, because they seem to decide what is acceptable and what not is acceptable based on their own goalposts. So, for example, you know, they have this kind of hate speech policy. You can't say anything that's against anyone. And then I think it was last week, a couple of the companies then decided, oh, well, actually, we're going to allow a special exception because of this situation in Ukraine. So if you're in a variety of these countries, you can actually be awful to these people, Putin and his foot soldiers. That's now allowed. And I find that completely bizarre, because who gets to determine who you're allowed to hate today? It's weird to me.
I completely agree. And, you know, when we had the Brexit debate, for example, I discovered as a former government servant that I was absolutely in a minority, and you know, I had a posting in Iraq during the war, and you know, one of the problems associated with the whole business of going into Iraq was around something called groupthink, and groupthink can be an incredibly powerful thing, and you know, I personally have become really quite concerned about certain groups of people genuinely believing that they are the arbiters of right thinking. And if you happen to be running a very major social media, I mean, with global power in terms of, you know, commercial power, and you have a right think view, there is a real risk that you will feel that you are justified in shutting down views that you're not comfortable with. And that for me looks pretty dangerous. And, these people aren't accountable in the same way that our politicians are. We can't necessarily hold them to account. And so I think you're absolutely right. This is something that needs to be, thought through very carefully. It's a new phenomenon and we have to think it through, but we have to think it through extremely carefully.
Yeah, and I think Piers Nick, for me, hits the nail on the head there when he talks about groupthink and wrongthink. And this is such a culture right now of what you're supposed to think, what's acceptable to think, and you're a good person if you think this and say this and do this, but then you're a bad person if you don't think this and you don't want to say this and you don't want to do this. And social media is really pivotal in this. So you're seeing it now, or I'm seeing it now anyway. It's kind of, people are changing their profile pictures right now, for example, to the flag of Ukraine. That's the kind of done thing. Before it was people are putting their social media pages to a black screen for Black Lives Matters. And it's almost like that's great, by the way, if you want to do that. But then there's this sentiment that if you don't have your Twitter picture as a Ukrainian flag or as a black square for Black Lives Matters, then somehow you're an awful person that doesn't care. It's ridiculous.
Yes, I mean, there's been that problem for several years as part of the culture wars, as they're called, or the culture skirmishes. Groupthink, though, operates on all sides of all ends of the political spectrum. It's not just the left who do it, although the left do it. I mean, the right do it as well. We've had a polarised world where people live in their own isolated social media bubbles and increasingly only listen to their favourite news outlets. And that's how fake news gets spread, or one way, along with the idea that truth doesn't really exist anyway. Truth is all relative. Reality is just what you think. And once you start thinking that, and that view has been associated with certain sections of the left, not all of it at all, but certain sections, they call themselves postmodernists or whatever, then you're really in trouble. But I want just to briefly take up something Emma said. I think you were right to say that, I mean, a lot of the culture wars around speech have been about really ostensibly increasing the freedom to speak of minorities and the underprivileged. That, I think, is true, and I think the right sometimes misses that point. I don't think the solution, though, is to go for censorship of the right or of powerful or allegedly powerful people. There must be other gatekeeping ways of making sure that marginalised voices get a hearing. But I do think that that's a point that really has to be factored into all these discussions there's been, so thanks for making it.
Thank you. But then there'll be people watching this. What you're saying is, this is all about giving the voice to the minorities, minority groups. There'll be people watching this that go, hang on a second, so much now of censorship is all about pandering to the minority voice. They would argue that actually the minority voice has become often the dominant voice, and they might perhaps have an issue with that.
Well, they may be then a minority voice that should be heard. I mean, I think it's fairly clear from... this is not my first time on Michelle's show. I'm very, very glad to be asked back.
Always welcome.
And, I quite often disagree with Michelle or other people, and she asks me back because that's what's interesting. And, the second one of your producers tells me what I'm supposed to say, I'm out of here. But they never will, and they never have.
Yeah.
And that's what's important. It's that not that there is a predominance of minority voices, not that there's a predominance of majority voices, but that all voices have an equal right to be heard and judged.
And seen, by the way.
And judged. And the judged is important. I can judge that what you say is absolute nonsense, and I have every right to say that.
But no, I hear you, and I guess, and I always say, by the way, I think censorship is the midwife to extremism. And what I mean by that is if someone's got a view and you constantly tell that person you're stupid or you're thick or you're wrong to have that view, and then actually what you try to do is you shut down that voice, all I think you achieve anyway is that person doesn't change their opinion. They sit there and seek alternate sources and alternate outlets to debate, discuss that, and then what happens is they end up going probably in a direction sometimes that you didn't want them to. So, by the way, you can remember that sentence, censorship is the midwife of extremism. You can have that one on me. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about UK defence spending. Do you think we spend enough? There's been calls for us to increase our spending by £10 billion. That's from the former head of the British Army. We'll be looking at that and more after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs and Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a reminder as to my panel tonight, we've got Nick Busfield, who's the former diplomat and Sevenoaks town councillor, Piers Ben, the philosopher, and political consultant Emma Burnell. Now, I've got to say, I always ask you guys to get in touch and tell me what's on your mind. I have to say, some of you have been in touch saying, Michelle, what are you talking about? Which is always reassuring. I think at the start of the programme, I was talking about these tanks, which a lot of the conversation about the money owed stems upon when we're talking about the releases back to the UK. I think I was saying that we'd bought the tanks from Iran. I got it the wrong way around, of course. So thank you, by the way, for those of you that messaged in. I know that you're listening. That's good. That's reassuring. You're paying attention. I like it. Lots of you. Gareth says, Michelle, I am disgusted that our weak government have paid a 400 million ransom to a rogue state like Iran. Sid says the UK should never have paid a penny. Nigel says, well, if it took the UK to pay the 400 million out, why didn't they do it 6 years ago? Bernard has the same sentiment. If they were going to pay for a release, they should have done it 6 years ago and avoided all of this. Someone else is talking about sanctions. Well, quite a few of you actually saying, what about all the sanctions against Iran? Interesting. Darren says all viewpoints, we've just been talking about free speech, etc. Darren says all viewpoints should be allowed airtime, except when those views have been consistently shown to be lies. Lots of you getting in contact about different opinions as well. I think it's absolutely crucial that we have different opinions, that we can have free debate, because let's not forget actually how lucky we are to be able to have opposing views and to be able to respectfully debate and disagree. Long may that continue, that's what I say. Now let's move on to another topic. The former head of the British Army has told GB News that UK defence spending must increase by about £10 billion a year to help counter the threat from Russia. General Lord Dannett said the Ministry of Defence should also consider buying equipment off the shelf from countries like the US instead of embarking on often delayed and hugely expensive domestic development programmes. Well, our security editor, Mark White, takes a look at the state of UK defence and the likelihood of any additional funding in the Chancellor's spring statement in a week's time.
Royal Marines on Arctic exercise alongside their NATO allies. These commando units and their fast attack craft symbolise the kind of rapidly deployable forces the UK Ministry of Defence sees as key to its future defence strategy. But faced with an ultra-aggressive Russia and its invasion of Ukraine, many defence experts are deeply concerned that cuts in force numbers have gone too far. With the Chancellor's spring statement a week away, he faces multiple competing demands. But defence spending has to be a key priority, according to the former head of the Army, who wants to see a £10 billion annual increase to the MOD's budget.
We've probably taken too much risk with our land warfare capability, and what we're now seeing with what the Russians are doing has exposed us to the extent that we really can't match that kind of capability, the sort of capability that the Russians are showing. So there is a very strong case to say we need to increase our defence budget by about £10 billion a year.
In 1990, at the end of the Cold War, the strength of the British Army was 150,000 personnel and 1,200 main battle tanks. Continued reductions in strength over the years left the Army with 82,500 soldiers last year and 227 battle tanks. The latest defence review means a further 10,000 cut in Army numbers over the next few years, with the battle tank strength dropping to just 148. For the strategic planners who thought that tank warfare had had its day, they only need look at Ukraine and the massive armour being deployed by Russia. But that conflict has also shown how small, sophisticated missile systems are proving highly effective. Like Lord Dannatt, the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee wants an immediate increase in funding of at least 20% and a reversal of plans to cut the number of land forces and tanks.
We've got rid of the Warrior fighting vehicle. This is a lighter tank with a big armament on the top of it. I used it in places like Bosnia. Very, very effective indeed. Brilliant for dismounted infantry as well. Now we're getting rid of all those, replacing that vehicle, this tracked vehicle, with a wheeled vehicle which doesn't have a big gun on the top. Now that would mean that we'd be very vulnerable on the battlefield itself.
In a statement, the Ministry of Defence told us to tackle the growing threats we face, we launched the Army's Radical Future Soldier reforms at the end of last year, which will make the service more agile, lethal and expeditionary. The Ministry of Defence has faced repeated criticism over the years for badly managed and over-ambitious equipment programmes, which have often seen their costs spiralling out of control. Lord Dannatt believes it may be time to look at buying some equipment off the shelf.
It's very good for British industry to design our own equipment, but perhaps sometimes, if there is an urgency about it, we ought to look to see what is there, probably on the American market, and consider holding our nose, if we like, and buying foreign as opposed to building it ourselves.
Okay, fire.
The UK has already doubled its military presence to bolster defences of some of its Eastern European allies, with many NATO countries, including Germany, looking to massively increase their defence spending in the face of a possible new Cold War. The pressure on the British government to follow suit is immense. Mark White, GB News.
Fascinating stuff. Now, Nick, the focus on defence now and how one defends themselves has really come into the spotlight, hasn't it, of course, with everything going on in Ukraine. What do you think to the report there? Should we be spending more money on defence?
Well, Michelle, I think that was an excellent report. I think one of the reasons why Putin invaded Ukraine is that he had a perception of weakness in the West. Germany in particular, I think, had run down its armed forces to an almost comical degree and put themselves firmly on the Russian gas hook. But even in the UK, I think that was an excellent package. But even in the UK, as your correspondent so graphically demonstrated, in 1990 we had an army of 150,000. It's now down to 82,000 and a projection of 75,000. And remember that you can only ever really deploy maximum a third of those operationally at any given time. That doesn't fill up much of a football stadium. And ultimately, there will be enormous lessons to be learnt about the use of...
Just help me understand that. What do you mean we can only deploy a third of them operationally?
Because the way our armed forces operate in the combat area, you can only a third will be resting after being deployed, and another third will be preparing, and a third will be actively deployed. So when you say you've got an army of 72,000, that's not 72,000 people you're going to be putting into the field. It's going to be a small proportion of that, and probably you can muster possibly as much as 2 divisions, 1 armoured division, 1 infantry division, and it's that's not very big. So there comes a point below which your ability to deter aggression just isn't taken seriously by your potential opponents. The problem, of course, is we've had the global financial crisis, we've had the COVID crisis, and the cupboard is pretty bare financially. This costs money, and I think General Dannatt was absolutely right. I mean, we seem to permanently make a nonsense of our MOD procurement plans and end up spending enormous amounts of money, the Ajax battle tank being the latest example, where they're scrapping a $5.5 billion programme because the thing vibrates.
Yeah.
You'd have thought
that someone might have done a bit of due diligence before they placed their orders to check suitability. Yeah. Emma, I've got to say, it's coming through thick and fast as we're having this conversation. The sentiment from the viewers, which is exactly the one that Nick picked up towards the end, which is, do we have some kind of magic money tree? Because we are constantly told, I mean, the conversations we've had at the moment, we've got a cost of living crisis that is about to escalate. We're told, right, we've got to raise national insurance to help kind of fund the NHS. We weren't cut VAT on fuel, all the rest of it. But yet here we are, constantly talking about more money for this, more money for that. We've sent hundreds of millions over to Ukraine. We seem to find all this money to house people that jump in dinghies and get over the things. People are writing in saying, well, hang on a second, because we removed the £20 uplift from universal credit. So where does this money come from? Ran over, by the way. My point is, should we be spending more on defence?
Well, I mean, it's hardly a news story that the ex-head of the army thinks the army should get more money, more at 7. But, I mean, let's face it, we have a very narrow view of what defence is. And it's actually our thinking doesn't match the things that we're going to do with any of the things that we buy. If we up our troop numbers, it's still not going to mean we send troops into anywhere. And we are a quite small island off with quite a big land barriers between us and anyone who might attack us, so they're probably going to come through other places first. So actually, why don't we, instead of playing this macho posturing game of I've got a bigger gun than you have, and we all know what that means, actually thinking about, well, what can we do? What should we be investing in that will make us more strong and independent as a nation? And that can mean investment in energy independence. It could mean investment in thinking about different ways of defending our coastal regions. Many of our coastal towns desperately need investment. There might well be a way for us to bring the levelling up agenda, the defence agenda, and the new geopolitical agenda together to actually benefit ordinary people rather than simply looking like we're a big, more macho man than Vladimir Putin. If anyone wants to do that, go off and wrestle with a bear and come back to me and ride a horse topless. In the meantime, let's think much more strategically and sensibly about how we would spend £10 billion.
Or do what Elon Musk did. I don't know if anyone saw what Elon Musk did a few days ago. I mean, how bizarre. He offered President Putin basically a fight to try and solve what was going on in Ukraine.
I wouldn't fancy his chances, if I'm honest.
Well, I look at that and I just think some men, and it is always men, sorry, but it is, some men are odd. Anyway, I digress. It's not about Elon Musk and his bizarre stuff. Piers, Emma says that she thinks that we've got a narrow view on what it means defence. I don't agree with that, actually, because I think that it's because we don't have such a narrow view of what defence means, i.e. boots on the ground, that is one of the reasons that the armed forces, that the army boots on the ground has been depleting over time. I think it's precisely because we've got a broader view on what defence means that is the reason why the reduction in boots on the ground soldiers, whatever you want to call them, because we invest in cyber, we invest in nuclear, we're a member of NATO. I think we're very broad in our thinking. Am I wrong?
Well, this is not my area of expertise. I mean, I take it the issue is about how much money we should give to defence. And we can leave it open what counts as defence, so it can include all the things you're mentioning, boots on the ground and cyber warfare, and also the many things the army does apart from just fight or prepare people to fight. I mean, the way it educates people, the way that it analyses history and politics, at least tangentially. So it does all these things. I mean, it's very difficult to comment on a claim that says X amount of money is being spent on defence. If it's phrased as, isn't it a scandal, only this amount of money is being spent on defence, you're meant to think, oh, goodness me, defence is very important. If, on the other hand, it's, goodness me, as much as this is being spent, then the reaction that's being sought is, oh, we should be spending rather less. I'm afraid that I'm not really an optimist when it comes to international affairs. I think that the world is full of some extremely wicked dictators. Putin, for example, is not only a highly dangerous, but a profoundly wicked man. And that's what we have to think of. I don't think it's macho posturing to say that, and I'm not saying that Putin's going to launch a land war on us. I don't think that's likely. I do worry a bit that America might be losing interest in NATO, and we certainly had the soundings from Donald Trump, who really seemed to want to have no interest at all, and Trump seems to be a fan of Putin, which is another very alarming thing. And we don't know what Biden's going to do. So it's a question of resource allocation. How do you allocate scarce resources? We have a huge debt after the pandemic. We've got promises everywhere, the NHS, furlough and so on. What do we do? I don't know.
Well, if you're getting bombed to smithereens, you won't need to have more to worry about than some of the spending commitments at the moment. Martin says the UK should definitely invest in more armed forces and deterrence. He says, if anything, the last 3 weeks has shown us that the world is not a safe place, and having a strong military presence ensures that what's happening in Ukraine is very unlikely to happen here. Now, I've got to say, I could almost spend another 2 hours on this topic because I think there's some quite interesting questions that one could pose. So, for example, and we don't have time to go into it all now, so it's subjects for another day, because one could question, for example, should we have Trident? Should we have a nuclear deterrent in this country? One could also ask the question, should we remain a member of NATO? Is that an interesting idea? Should we be a part of NATO? Should we have instead basically come out of NATO and have a non-intervention strategy and perhaps keep ourselves to ourselves a little bit more rather than interfering in so many international conflicts? There's a novel idea. But as I said, perhaps subjects for another day. I'm sure there'll be very divisive subjects. So yes, I will actually cover those. For now, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about abortions. Why? Well, over in the States, there's a new law, basically, which has banned abortions after 6 weeks in 2 states. And I wonder about this. Should it ever be illegal for a woman to have an abortion? I mean, I have to say, I know this one is quite an emotional topic for many. So I look forward to the debate in just a couple of minutes.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, the head of staff for Putin critic and political prisoner Andrei Pivarov discussed the state of Russia's resistance movement. That's not all. Top columnists Brendan O'Neill and Rod Little weigh in too. And I'll debate the day's top headlines with my superstar panel. Daily Mail star columnist Amanda Platel, the activist and businessman Adam Brooks, and political commentator Daisy McAndrew. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. With me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a brief reminder as to who my panel are tonight. We've got Nick Busvine, the former diplomat and Sevenoaks Town Councillor, Piers Ben, the philosopher, and political consultant Emma Burnell. Liam has been in touch on the email saying, where he uses an abbreviation that I will not repeat at tea time, but what he's saying is, what are you doing, Michelle? You are sounding like Nicola Sturgeon. What? Goodness me, I've got to say, I didn't think that's ever a comparison that I'd be hearing, but apparently me and Nicola Sturgeon are similar because I've just suggested leaving NATO. Apparently, you think I'm crackers, but this is my point. I think there is indeed an interesting debate to be had. Liam has also got in touch, has said, we should be having the conversation about foreign aid. And I think also you are onto quite an interesting point there, Liam. This is indeed a debate that we should be having because ultimately we send all these aid to countries, of course, countries sometimes that have space stations or space programs, simultaneously perhaps aligned with people that we wouldn't want them to be aligned with. So you're quite right. Foreign aid is a future debate. I've made a note. It's logged in here and we shall come on to that on a future show. But for now, over in the US, abortion continues to be a major topic of debate with a growing number of Republican politicians calling for tighter restrictions. Idaho has followed Texas to become the second US state to ban abortion after 6 weeks. It's called basically the heartbeat law, and it will also allow people the right to sue abortion providers for damages. Idaho, like most US states, have previously allowed abortion up to 24 weeks into the pregnancy. In the UK, an abortion can be carried out before 24 weeks of pregnancy, and an abortion can only be carried out after 24 weeks if the mother's life is at risk or if the child were to be born with severe disabilities. So what do we think to this? Should pro-life trump pro-choice? Is abortion a basic human right, which is the view that many have? Emma?
Yes, it is.
It is
and it is a basic human right. It's my body. I get to choose what to do with it. You do not get to legislate over my uterus. I'm sorry, you just don't.
But do you have any cut-offs there? Do you think?
I think there are cut-offs and there are legal cut-offs that are reasonable in the law at the moment. I think the law of 24 weeks is fair and safe and balances the rights of an eventually viable fetus with the rights of the woman whose body will be used and abused otherwise. 6 weeks, on the other hand, is just a nonsense. I don't know about you, Michelle, but my periods can be all over the place. There's no way I would necessarily know if I was knocked up or not at 6 weeks. But equally, well, if you really want to know how cruel this bill is, there is a part of it that says that ectopic pregnancies have to be reinserted. That's actually medically impossible. So doctors will either be punished for not being able to do something that's medically possible, or women will be suffering through an ectopic pregnancy because they're unable to abort it. So that is cruel.
So you're in favour of abortion and you think that the UK is there or thereabouts right at the moment with the limit of 24 weeks. Nick?
Well, I have to sort of declare, and I'm a Catholic, and I'm a Catholic convert, and obviously the Catholic Church has a very firm view that life begins at the point of conception. Now, I think this is an incredibly difficult subject, and I personally don't feel, I completely respect what Emma is saying. It is a deeply personal thing, particularly for, obviously for women. And But, you know, the fundamental view put forward by the Catholic Church is that life begins at the point of conception. You know, that's when a new life begins. And in a way, although I think you can argue about the number of weeks and so on, I think it's terribly, terribly important to force a debate on this issue and think through the moral issues that underpin it. And I am aware it's incredibly complex and incredibly difficult. But in a way, I think it's a good thing that it isn't just an automatic, yeah, that's it, you know, it's sorted, it's a fundamental right, and we can do it. I think it is one of those issues that is a legitimate focus of debate.
Piers?
Yeah, well, I think abortion is a morally complex issue. And I'm not saying that just for the sake of it, or just because you'd expect a philosopher to say that. I also appreciate that it might seem a luxury to say that if you are in need of an abortion, or if you might see it as very annoying to debate it intellectually. And I'm not doing that in that spirit. I think the moral complexity comes from the fact that we've got a sort of conflict of rights or alleged rights here. On the one hand, as a matter of description, whatever the ethics of it, abortion is deliberate killing. On the other hand, a woman is, as it were, being required to allow her body to be used to sustain a life, which is, let's admit, a life, at least in the relatively late stage of pregnancy, and probably after the present cut-off, well, certainly well before the present cut-off state limit for abortion in this country. That's, I mean, and the debate has run and run and run on this question. I mean, it's confounded by so many different factors. But I would just point to this distinction that we draw in other areas, such as sexual morality and perhaps financial morality. We do distinguish between what people ought or not to do and what they ought or not be allowed to do. And I think there's a case for saying, okay, even if you accept the moral complexity of the ethical issue, I think we should, there is something worrying, as Emma said, about this sort of bill in America, which not only allows private prosecution by family members, but also anybody who objects to abortion to mount a prosecution against a doctor whom they say has performed an abortion. It's very difficult to talk about it because to do so honestly really requires hours, and probably not many people have the empathy or the sort of perspective to get a grip on the whole thing. So it's actually quite difficult for me to talk about this. But that, I think, is where the complexity comes from. I mean, there are several debates. One is about, is the fetus alive? Well, in an obvious sense it is. Is the fetus a person? Well, what do you mean by a person? That's the issue there. It doesn't have any self-awareness, but then nor does a newborn baby. Does that mean infanticide is okay? Some would say yes, others say, well, hold on, that's a good argument against abortion. You can see how this really, really runs and runs. But we do need tolerant and rational debate on it.
Yeah, we do, and I do fully appreciate it. It's a very emotional subject. Lots of people are already writing in about it, and I had a very premature baby, and I spent a lot of time on a NICU, basically, like an intensive care ward for babies. So I saw not only my own child, but lots of other children that were born very, very prematurely. So I think for me personally, I've really had an insight into a child before they are born at 40 odd weeks. Before they're born, they're still babies. So for me, it's quite a tricky one because I absolutely believe in the right of choice. But then I also, these are children. And one of the things that makes me really sad, by the way, I've just been looking at some of the numbers, was about the amount of increases in abortions for children that are suspected to have cleft lip and palate. You're allowed to abort those children until right up the date. And I wish that people understood more about cleft lip and palate. I really do. That's the problem here. There's a lot of misunderstanding. Anyway, I must wrap this up for tonight. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Matthew says, I would join the debate, Michelle, but I'm a man. Matthew, have you not been paying attention? Men can get pregnant too, apparently. I'll leave you there with that thought. Anyway, that's all I've got time for. Thank you very much for your company. Thank you very much to my panel. The debate shall rumble on. If you want to drop me a line, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll have some of those debates on those subjects, NATO, Trident, foreign aid, all to come on another night. But for now, have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. Widespread rain has affected many parts of the UK during Wednesday, but that rain clears overnight and then a chilly night to come, followed by a fine Thursday for the vast majority. A couple of weather fronts still slowly moving across the UK and the weather clearing up from the west. But I think for the rest of the evening, it's still wet across many parts of eastern England as the rain slowly moves into the North Sea. Cloud eventually clearing as well. And then a gap between weather systems. Many places clear overnight, light winds as well. Perhaps one or two fog patches. More widespread, we'll see a frosty start with temperatures at or around freezing. Now, we start off Thursday with that chill in the air, but plenty of sunshine for Scotland, England and Wales. Northern Ireland sees cloudier skies from the word go, some showers here, and those showers push into Scotland, falling as snow over the hills. One or two showers affecting Northern England and North Wales as well. But to the south of that, we keep the sunny skies into the afternoon and temperatures will rise to 15 or 16 Celsius. So feeling very pleasant indeed compared to Wednesday's weather. But it turns colder in the north and northwest of Scotland as further showers arrive, falling as hail, sleet and snow in places, but eventually fading away during Thursday evening, so that for most, again, Thursday night into the start of Friday is dry with long clear spells and temperatures falling close to freezing where we get those clear skies.